Добрый вечер.
Здравствуйте, товарищи.
Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Cinema Politburo podcast. My name's Mike, and I'm joined by my co-host Regan.
Hello.
And in each episode, we will be going behind the Iron Curtain of cinema and looking at the history of the Cold War and the former communist bloc through the prism of different movies. And we're starting our first proper podcast by looking at the film Goodbye Lenin. There were many contenders for the first film we would cover, and this one seems to be a great place to start. So it's over to Regan for the film synopsis.
Yeah. In 1990, to protect his fragile mother from a fatal shock after a long coma, a young man must keep her from learning that her beloved nation of East Germany, as she knew it, has disappeared. Goodbye Lenin was directed by Wolfgang Becker. It was the screenplay was by Bernard Lichtenberg and Becker himself. The production company that released the film was Ex-Filme Creative Pool. The film was released in Germany on the 13th of February 2003, and it was later released that year in the UK on the 21st of July. The budget for the film was approximately 6.8 million euros, and at the box office the film took in nearly 80 million, so that made it a worldwide success. The film retained its budget 15 times over. Also, the film won several awards. Best Film at the European Film Awards. Daniel Brühl won Best Actor for his incredible performance, and Bernard Lichtenberg won Best European Screenplay. The film also cleared up at the German Film Awards and was nominated for a BAFTA in the category Best Film Not in an English Language.
So let's start looking at some of the key plot points in more detail. We can't make any promises, but we will endeavour to avoid any big spoilers for anyone that hasn't got around to watching it yet. So at the start of the film, we have flashbacks to Alex's childhood to give us some context. His father, he believes, has defected to the West, and in Alex's words, is getting his brains fucked out by his enemy of the state girlfriend. He says his mother became married to the socialist fatherland, and she throws herself into socialist activism in the DDR, which Alex is increasingly indifferent to.
He is, yeah. Alex is the main character, and he's also the narrator of the film, and the film is told through his perspective, which is important and very powerful at times, but also, ironically, a lot of people who were born after the fall of the DDR didn't actually know a lot about it when the film was released. The opening images of the film are shot on a Super 8 camera and show Alex happily playing with his sister. It's the summer of 1978. It's clear that father has filmed these memories, and they give the impression that father is very happy filming his children. What's also interesting is that the mother doesn't actually appear to be anywhere in this opening footage. I wonder, is this done to create the divide between them that we learn about, as the father, as Micah said, defects to the West? The opening titles continue with various images of East Germany showing the radio tower, Lada cars, Alexanderplatz, statues and placards of former Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin. All this is intercut using the Ken Burns photography effect at steady pace, with the colour red being the most prominent within. White text introducing actors and crew appearing and fading on various areas of the screen. The soundtrack keeps pace with the continual pace cutting of new information being presented to us. The film is quoted as being a tragic comedy, and with this opening soundtrack, it gives quite a relaxing feeling, but also a potential for struggle or potential heartbreak. So when the title Goodbye Lenin appears, a statue of Lenin revolves around the image of the spaceflight Soyuz 31 that launched on August the 26th, 1978. With astronaut Sigmund Jähn. This is accompanied by the sound of satellites or a spaceship orbiting around the statue of Lenin. Could this be interpreted as communism being more important? Lenin is bigger than space. Momentarily before it fades into the living room of Alex, eagerly watching this magnificent moment for him and his country on the TV. The product of great joint endeavour will be put to the test here. The principal quality supplied by all to all can be seen perfectly here. Alex then reinforces the point by saying, "We were world class."
Yeah, so cut to 1989, and Alex is drinking a beer on a bench outside the apartment block that he lives in with his family, and the preparations for the 40th anniversary of the DDR are in full swing. Alex knowingly says that this could be the last time with the old guard, so there's a sense that the end of the regime is imminent.
Yeah, and that's quite evident, I think, as well, because obviously the going out that, you know, they're really pushing about out here. You know, Alex is surrounded by the flags of the Socialist Party and the red banners that appear to be hanging everywhere, and they dominate everywhere as well. Even when he's in his bedroom, the red colour of the socialist state invades his room, casting him under a red light. Alex, ironically, has his head under the pillow to escape the sound of the marching and perhaps the colour of red that surround and try to consume him. Even when he heads into the lounge to talk to his mother, who is ironing her red dress for the party celebration late that evening, it seems he is unable to escape the clutches of the socialist society and reverts back to covering his face again, as it's even on the television.
Yeah, and next Alex attends an anti-government protest. The response from the state is swift and brutal, and presumably it's the People's Police or the Volkspolizei, or VOPO for short, that responds. Incredibly, for a country with a population of about 16 million in the 1980s, the VOPO had over 250,000 employees, which was made up of around 90,000 full-time police officers and more than 170,000 volunteers. And there's a scene where one of the policemen breaks the leg of one of the protesters. It's pretty gruesome, and sticks in my mind.
Yeah, that is a rather gruesome moment in that scene. But what I think is interesting about this scene in particular is the first shot we actually see is of it's a lamppost, but to me it feels more like a camera, and it's monitoring these anti-government protesters who calmly approach beneath to peacefully just demonstrate. You know, and talking about the colour of the scene, they all seem to be dressed very similar, apart from Laura, who becomes an integral character within the narrative further on, but she's wearing it's sort of like a white polo neck style jumper, and that just makes her stand out amongst the other protesters. She has a little quick smile of Alex. Obviously there's a bit of chemistry before it all kicks off. And again, what's important in this scene is the colour red, because we see the mum, who is now wearing that dress she was elegantly ironing earlier, but she's also wearing a white cardigan, and I think this either signifies her purity to the violence that is now surrounding her, or her ignorance. Either way, she becomes a casualty of the uprising as she suffers a heart attack and collapses on the floor. But throughout various shots of this scene, the impression of a camera watching is prominent as we zoom in on police exiting trucks, falling into positions, and the camera then sharply turns at one point as if spotting or being alerted to something. In the prison hall, it's the regime that have re-established control again as the anti-government protesters fall into the line with their hands above their heads really submissively. I think this is like the way these shots are intercut, it's really powerful. And then it's the state that decides to tell Alex about his mother, but only after Alex has submitted to their requirements, as when he turns around you can clearly see that he's got a black eye, so either something's happened on the way back in the van, but either way he's suffered again. So if he steps out of line again, then the same thing is going to happen.
And so yeah, his mother is hospitalised, she's in a coma, and during this time the Berlin Wall falls. Erich Honecker, party leader, resigns, and we start to see capitalism flooding into the east. And one of the first things that Alex does is go to the west and watch porn in a CD video rental store. His sister gets a job at Burger King. I think it's interesting that they decided to go with Burger King rather than McDonald's, which is generally the more obvious standard bearer of free market capitalism in the world. Alex gets a job installing satellite dishes, and one thing that I'd never noticed when watching the film before is the satellite dish logo on his red overalls looks a lot like the hammer and sickle.
Yeah, it does, and it presents quite a powerful image. I think, especially there's a shot later on where when they leave one of the blocks, obviously where everyone lives, there's about 30 new satellites all shining with the logo on, so it reinforces that Western influx. But yeah, the company Alex work for in the East goes bust, literally. A lot of that probably to do with the tellies that are now coming in from the West are a lot more advanced. But again, there's something about this scene which sticks out in my mind, because he's talking about it like he's already feeling the nostalgia, because he actually says, I turned off the light, thus meaning I closed this chapter in my life. But I think there's a clear link here between light and dark, or good and bad, whatever way you perceive it. Luckily, he's paired with a Westerner, Dennis, who seems to be as excited to be working with someone from the East, and he's paired with Alex. And despite the differences, they seem to get on really well. And what's interesting in this scene, I think, as well, if you watch it closely, you can see that the guys in the West stand rather smugly in comparison to a few of the guys in the East, who just, they look a bit annoyed, a bit perplexed. One guy in particular stands with his arms folded, not impressed, rather angry, because for a lot of these Eastern workers, their employment lives were just uprooted and destroyed, and they've not had time to adjust or work out what's going to happen, or where their careers are going to go now, or what's going to happen to their pension. So
yeah, so things are changing quickly, and after 8 months, Alex's mother wakes up from a coma. The doctors warn that she's still very fragile. Alex decides not to tell her that the wall has fallen, worried about the consequences for her health. His sister is suspicious, and Alex accuses her of quitting college to sell burgers. Alex sets about changing their flat to how it looked before the wall fell. The scene is sped up while Beethoven plays, which is reminiscent of the scene in A Clockwork Orange, where the anti-hero, also called Alex, brings back two young Devotchkas to his bedroom for sex. Alex is trying to find products available in the DDR. Obviously, most of them have disappeared from shelves and shops in the avalanche of consumerism. And it's at this point that we realise that a whole country has stopped existing. And that's part of the fascination people have with the DDR. The story of East Germany isn't just about a repressive police state, but it's also the lives of ordinary people making the best of things. And this is where the film really starts to spark people's interest in the products and aspects of everyday life in the DDR. Obviously, this phenomenon has become known as nostalgia for the East. So back to the film plot. The mother is none the wiser when she returns home. Her birthday is approaching, and the countdown is represented by a sped up shot of the famous clock in Alexanderplatz in the shadow of the iconic TV tower. Alex needs to collect his mother's old friends together and work colleagues for the celebration. Many of them have lost their jobs after the collapse of the wall. The head teacher of the school she worked at is now basically an unemployed alcoholic. And there's actually a really interesting article I read in the New York Times recently about how the end of East Germany still impacts today, particularly with the rise of the German far right. It basically says some 3 million jobs, most of them in traditionally male industries, were lost over 2 years, and the working class heroes of socialism became the working class losers of capitalism. Goes on to say East German men were abandoned by their newly united country practically overnight, and this is a theme that crops up a few times in Goodbye Lenin. After the wall came down, the East lost more than 10% of its population, and 2/3 of those who left and did not come back were young women. So that paints a very different picture from the one we're usually told, where the wall fell, capitalism won, everyone was free and happy, living the consumerist lifestyles they'd always dreamt of. End of story. For many people, it meant the loss of their livelihoods, their families, and the stability and assurance provided to them by an albeit repressive state bureaucracy overseeing a generally stagnating economy. Next, it's the birthday party itself. Alex bribes a couple of local kids to dress as young pioneers, the socialist youth group, and sing socialist songs, while the mother's boss, the former head teacher, gives a rambling speech and presents her with a gift basket of East German products. Then we have one of the big scenes in the movie where his mother looks out the window of a bedroom and sees the unveiling of the Coca-Cola logo on a nearby apartment block. Obviously another big symbol of consumerism and capitalism. Personally, I'm interested in the kind of little nitty-gritty trivia, and went on the subject of Coca-Cola. The East Germans did actually start producing their own version called Vita Cola, starting in 1957, and advertised as a carbonated soft drink with fruit and herb flavouring. And interestingly, this disappeared from the shelves after the fall of the wall, as you probably expect, but it has made a big comeback in the last few years, thanks to Nostalgie. There is also another East German Coke brand called Club Cola, which has also made a similar reappearance. So now Alex has to take this truth that he is manufacturing to the next level and create a myth that Coke is a socialist invention. And he does this by creating fake news reports with his co-worker Dennis. And this happens several times throughout the movie.
In today's world, how big is fake news? It's such a passive term now. Everyone knows what fake news is. Anything can be fake news. But Dennis is such a powerful character within the film Goodbye Lenin. He's a great editor, great reporter, and also he's a really good friend to Alex. But what's important about the character of Dennis, I think, as well, is that he represents the unification between the East and the West. It is possible, as they both become a really good sales team, and ironically through television, that both the East and the West continually promote the news, the ideologies and their brands to us. Alex sells the values of the West to his Eastern neighbours through his job, and then at the end of the day he goes home and revisits the past that he has created again for his fragile mother on the TV, which I think is I just find that really funny myself. It's like he's almost got like a split personality, and there's a good contrast between the Western colours and the Eastern colours, throughout. So he's faced with the loss, I think, of both his mother and the state, which she recognised. The memory of his childhood and the vanishing of the DDR start to take on parallel potentials to his imagination of space, as he's come up with the new ways to create the DDR without his mother catching on, which you spoke about within the scene with the birthday party. This is where the main humour, I think, of the film derives from. So I think, how does Becker inject humour through the use of the film, through increasing the pace of certain scenes, like the redecorating of the mother's room, which you mentioned as reference to Clockwork Orange. It's sprinkled with style in the way that it's edited, because it speeds up things up and it slows things down, but when it's sped up, it's very mundane tasks or very mundane things, so it just adds a bit of humour to it. And also speeding things up adds pace to Alex's hectic mindset, and also his lifestyle, which could be a deliberate ploy for us not to get hung up on the direct impacts or feelings of a lot of our communities or characters maybe experience. Again, Mike, what you were just talking about there, about communities being lost and jobs falling and changing ever so quickly, and especially for the German audience, a lot of these scenes, it is bringing back nostalgia for them. So the best way to do this, I think, is through a positive way rather than a negative approach. The pace within the movie doesn't really give us time to dwell on these issues, so we sort of accept it, but we do that through humour. Or even like any movie, any film that is ever made, I think has to have rewatch value. Now, this film alone is packed with so much, and one of the things that I think we both can agree on and we enjoy about it is that even now, when we still sit down and watch it, there are things that we are spotting, and you will continue to spot, because Becker has had to cram a lot into these 2 hours, and it's powerful, and it's wonderful to watch.
Yeah. So next, Alex's mum suddenly remembers where she hid the family savings, and there's a race against time to exchange them for Deutschmarks that can be to be spent in the unified Germany. As you could probably predict, they've unfortunately missed the deadline for exchanging these marks, and Alex is like really angry about it. The guy who works in the bank isn't really that bothered. He's quite dismissive, but Alex barks back. This was the money we saved for 40 years, and now you say it's worthless. Which the whole scene sort of highlights the dismissive way people from the East were often treated by those in the West. And this kind of contempt is echoed in the next scene, where Alex returns home and gets into an argument with Rainer, who is his sister's sort of goofy hipster boyfriend. Rainer's let in some local kids to sing songs to Alex's mother. These kids think they're going to get paid. Obviously, the rumour's going round. If you go around these people's flat and sing the old songs, you might make a few marks. Obviously, Alex isn't happy about this because he's not in control of the situation. Rainer shouts at him, "You Aussies, people from the East, are never satisfied, always complaining. You're just like your mother with her stupid letters and petitions." Alex's mother writes a lot of letters on behalf of concerned citizens. Alex shouts back, "My mother doesn't complain. She offers constructive criticism to help improve conditions in society. You Vessies, people from the West, never cared about that." So it's a really great bit of dialogue. Alex is using sort of orthodox socialist vocabulary, using it to defend his mother, even though he was never originally committed to the DDR or its ideals, or at least he thought. In the next scene, Alex's sister returns home and she's seen their dad while she's working at Burger King. This reminds us that the loss of the dad is sort of central to the storyline. It's a reason why the mum became so committed to the socialist state in the first place. It also shows that the loss of the dad when he supposedly defected is as traumatic to their family as the loss of the country. And then while Alex is sleeping, his mum sneaks out of the flat. As she gets into the lift in the apartment block, the first thing she spots is a swastika daubed inside the lift. Christiane, Alex's mother, looks shocked because, well, we know far-right graffiti would not have been left visible for very long in the DDR.
Yeah, and it's this neo-Nazi graffiti that I think confuses Alex's mother. Does she think she's still asleep, or is it real? The scene where the mother escapes the flat, it's beautiful. The scene is full of dark humour with mother's initial confusion. The link with the baby and the first footsteps is powerful. The baby's pointing to the West cigarette blimp, ironically with a slogan that reads, "Test the West." The link between mother and baby is vital, as fundamentally, if mother is to survive in this new world, she'll have to take little steps, just like the baby, as the world that she once knew is now gone. The soundtrack reinforces this again and plays an integral part. It's a very nervy sound. The fingers are lightly on the piano. We know the potential risks mother will face, but we want her to take them. She misses the Burger King uniform hanging up, which I found quite funny. Maybe she just doesn't recognise these type of colours, I don't know, but I just think that's really funny that she misses them. Venturing out, the pace of the scene remains stable and the shots throughout are intercut very well. Through mother's perspective, we enjoy the dramatic irony. Becker and his team here, I think, could produce something that is incredibly gripping, funny and beautiful all at the same time.
And next we see a group of bohemian hipsters from the West moving in to their apartment block, into flats that we can assume were vacated by people moving to the West. And this is a nod to gentrification, which we see everywhere today, around the world, and obviously in Berlin as well. Whole districts built for the workers are taken over by hipsters. There's actually a lot of controversy and protests in Berlin recently about the selling off of apartments on Karl Marx Alley to a real estate consortium. Further along, Alex's mother walks past adverts for cigarettes, cars and lingerie, replacing what would have once been political propaganda, and the scene culminates in the epic vision of the statue of Lenin being winched by a helicopter right in front of her.
Yeah, and it's this the old versus the new are quite clearly juxtaposed here. Mother wanders out into the streets, as you said, with the littered furniture, which I think in some respects it looks like something out of a very apocalyptic. During this, the music builds with a waking Alex realising his mother has escaped. Again, we see this role reversal of mother and child. Alex is fearful for his mother, but fearful like a parent for a child as he rushes down to her aid. On the way down the staircase, he almost knocks a pram down. This could be quick reference to Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin, which is one of the most iconic moments of the silent cinema, the Odessa staircase. The dream sequence here is reinforced as Lenin now flies and is coming towards mother's aid. Is Lenin going to rescue her? Would this be a fitting compliment to one of the most former dedicated socialists of the former DDR?
And now Alex basically has to, think of a way of explaining everything's going on. And he concocts this story that the DDR has taken in thousands of political refugees from the West.
The mother shows a true socialist beliefs here, as she says to both the children, look, we must do our bit. This is a very powerful thing that she actually says, because what she's saying is, look, the East is not for the select few or the rich, but it's for all, including the Western refugees. So yeah, it's it shows her true colours that she actually did believe in the socialist model, and she did want to try and make the world a better place.
Yeah, and obviously her version of socialism, it was very benevolent and idealistic. So next, the family go to their dacha in the countryside, and Christiane reveals that their dad didn't actually abandon them as they had been told, but the family were meant to join him in the West. She also says she wants to see him one last time to make amends. She chose to stay, fearing that the state would take her kids away, and obviously Alex and his sister aren't too pleased about this.
Telling the children the truth is something her body's had to endure for a number of years, and I think by that point she's just relieved to have told them. And she's glad now that they will be able to develop a relationship again with the father. We know that Alex's sister served him in Burger King, which she found rather upsetting, and you can tell they obviously loved the dad a lot, so the fact that there's that merger of a relationship coming to fruition again is very important. But maybe I think the mum deep down feels guilty for not following him to the West, but one thing about the unification is that it's making mother answer to her mistakes that weren't done for mistakes that were done for the right reasons, in good faith perhaps. But
yeah, so next the mum relapses. She's back in hospital but is awake, and Alex creates one final fake news broadcast, and it features a taxi driver who we are led to believe may be Sigmund Jähn, the East German cosmonaut and the first German in space. He pretends to be the new leader of East Germany, replacing Erich Honecker, and he declares that the borders are going to be opened. In his speech he says, socialism doesn't mean living behind a wall, socialism means reaching out to others and living with others, not just to dream about a better world, but to make the world a better place. And Alex, as the narrator, says he was creating the DDR he wished had existed. Prior to all this, there's a scene where Lara, Alex's girlfriend, seems to be telling Christiane, the mother, the truth about what has happened while she was in a coma. So it seems that she knows from that point on the truth, that the wall has fell. And I think that's a good point to leave our analysis of the plot, as we don't want to spoil the very end for anyone that hasn't seen it. But one thing I know you want to bring up, Regan, is the Matrix connection.
yes, the scene we first see Dennis in, and he's showcasing his editing skills on the software that he has, the VHS and the TV, and he's cutting together a wedding video to the music of one of Stanley Kubrick's movie Space Odyssey. It's there's a clear reference to the film The Matrix from 1999, directed by the Wachowski brothers, and we know this because he's wearing a black shirt with Matrix coding on it. Now, for me, that's a very powerful moment, because what is Dennis potentially doing? He's creating a world, and what does he end up doing? He ends up creating a world for Alex's mum when she's bedridden, or not just Alex's mum, but for Alex himself, because for as much as Alex likes to distance himself from the East, it's something that he can't seem to let go of, and through creating this fake news and creating this fake world for his mum, it helps him to come to terms with the end of his childhood and the end of East Germany. So the impact of Dennis's character and what Dennis's character can do has, you know, a massive impact on the film itself. And when we talk about the DDR, a lot of people, you know, are quick to say, you know, it was very, very all tightly controlled. And if you've watched the film The Matrix is about control and how we all fit into this controlled world and how we're effectively trying to break free from it. And you know, is ignorance bliss, or should we be happy with what we got, or to have more of something, or control? You know, that's my take on it, Mike. I don't know what your feelings are on it.
Yeah, well, for me, like, you know, the film The Matrix asks that question, you know, what is freedom? And Marxists use this term, false consciousness, to describe the way the working class, you know, unwittingly submit themselves to the ideological dominance of the ruling class. In The Matrix, the false consciousness is literally created to keep humans in this kind of slave state. In the Eastern Bloc, a false reality was projected by the ruling parties, you know, through state media. In Goodbye Lenin, Alex is creating a false reality for virtuous reasons. So for me, that's very much what this deliberate link to The Matrix is all about.
And also, you know, there's that moment in the film, or throughout the film, is this a fairy tale? Because mother spends 9 months in a coma, and is it almost like a reference to Sleeping Beauty? You know, she wakes up when her son is kissing Lara. So there's that very theme of like a fairy tale.
So I want to move on next to talking about the film locations in Goodbye Lenin. Most of it is filmed in Friedrichshain in East Berlin. The apartment block used for the family's home is on Berliner Strasse off Karl Marx Alley, and it's behind Kino International, which is a cinema where film premieres took place in the DDR. As I said, it's filmed on Berliner Strasse. Berliner was a mythical female figure symbolising the city of Berlin, similar to Britannia symbolising Britain. There was a 5-ton statue of her in Alexanderplatz, which was damaged during the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919. Finally dismantled towards the end of World War II, probably to be smelted down. Karl Marx Alley, I'm sure many listeners have walked along. It was originally named Stalin Alley until 1961, and it's a pretty magnificent example of socialist classicist architecture. And in terms of movie trivia, I've read that the story of the film is also loosely based on the final years of Lenin's life after he had a debilitating stroke. And the idea is that Stalin printed lots of newspapers with fake news in that censored the sort of big political struggles at the time, with the intention of not overexciting Lenin, which could exacerbate his health problems. And in terms of the cast, obviously the lead role, as we've already said, is Daniel Brühl. He's obviously gone on to great success in films like Inglourious Bastards. He was in another film not long after Goodbye Lenin called The Educators, which I quite liked, about a group of anti-capitalist activists in Germany who break into the homes of rich people, move furniture around, leave cryptic notes. They end up kidnapping a wealthy businessman who is played by the same actor that plays Alex's dad in Goodbye Lenin. The sister is played by Maria Simon. She was born in the DDR and has had several film and TV theatrical roles. The mother is played by Katrin Sass, also born in the DDR. She was a well-known actress in East Germany. She stars in a German TV series called Weissensee, which I haven't seen, but I've heard good reviews. It's about two families in East Berlin towards the end of the DDR. I'm not sure if it's available with English subtitles, but definitely something worth looking out for. Lara, Alex's love interest, is played by Chulpan Kamatova. She was born in the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Republic, and in 2012 she was awarded the title of People's Artist of Russia. I like the fact that her character introduces herself as Lara, like in Dr. Zhivago. I really love Dr. Zhivago. It's one of my favourite films. I've watched it maybe 15 times, and it's another one that never gets boring for me, so that might be one that we look at in a future podcast. The boyfriend of Alex's sister, who we referred to briefly, Rainer, he's played by Alexander Bayer. He was born in Erfurt, which was then part of the DDR. According to his filmography on IMDb, he also had a role in a 2009 film, Attack on Leningrad, and the 2000 film Legend of Rita, which focuses on collusion between the Red Army faction terrorist group and the Stasi. Again, another film I think we should explore. He also appears in Deutschland 83, which is a brilliant series I'm sure many people have watched. It's about a Stasi agent sent to infiltrate the West German army. Florian Lucas plays Alex's co-worker and collaborator Dennis. Obviously the character is a real gem, as we've discussed. He was actually cast in the lead role before Daniel Brühl was. Florian was born in East Germany in 1973. He had a role in a film released last year called The Silent Revolution, about a group of school children in the DDR who hold a silent protest in solidarity with the Hungarian uprising in 1956. So that definitely sounds like a film to look out for as well. So like any half decent movie reviewers, we'll be giving each film a star rating out of 5, which we will be calling the Red Star rating. Obviously I've got a lot of affection for this film. I went to the cinema to see it when it came out. I would have been around 19, 20 years old. It's largely responsible for sparking my interest in the German Democratic Republic, and I think it's fair to say it helped kickstart the rise of nostalgia for the DDR, that phenomenon known as nostalgia. It is an outstanding film, and I would award it 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I would. I'd go along 4 stars. It's, from a film perspective, it's beautifully shot. It's very well paced. The soundtrack, phenomenal. It really grips you. The story itself, the characters, they're all interesting. And one of the most important things for any filmmaker is the rewatch value. And this is a film that I can and will watch again and again over time. It's so well constructed and it's well directed, well produced.
Yeah, I totally agree. If anyone's planning to take a trip to Germany and wants to find out more about life in the DDR, there are quite a few museums that are worth visiting. Berlin has its main DDR museum in the city centre on Karl-Liebknecht-Strasse, a street which is one of several that retained its East German name, Karl Liebknecht being an important German socialist and one of the founders of the German Communist Party, along with Rosa Luxemburg. I'd also recommend visiting Alltag in the DDR, which translates as everyday life in the DDR. This is a free museum in the Kulturbrauerei, which is a building in Prenzlauer Berg district of East Berlin. My favourite museum though is in Dresden, called Die Welt der DDR, or the world of the DDR. It actually is situated in a shopping centre and has a good collection of DDR era vehicles and lots of memorabilia, which they exhibit in recreated scenes of shops and homes, classrooms and workplaces. There's not much information in English in the museum, but it is still worth visiting, which I did during a day trip to Dresden when I was staying in Berlin a couple of years ago. During that trip I also stayed for one night in Ostel, which is a DDR themed hostel in East Berlin, around the corner from which is a restaurant with a DDR inspired menu, so you can sample authentic communist era cuisine like goulash, solyanka and Jägerschnitzel. In terms of actually buying DDR products, it's always worth having a browse in the flea markets that tend to take place at the weekend in Berlin. The VEB Orange shop in Prenzlauer Berg has lots of original items as well, from kitchenware to ornaments, clothes and assorted random knickknacks. Okay, so I think that just about brings us to the end of this episode. We want to thank everyone for listening. You can email us your feedback and suggestions. The address is coldwarpop@hotmail.com. Instagram is currently our only social media platform, so if you haven't already, you can follow us at Cinema Politburo. Also on Instagram you can find a series of photos I've taken during my travels around the Eastern Bloc. That's at Eastern Bloc Travels. And lastly, you can listen to our specially curated Spotify playlist with songs from movies that share the theme of the podcast, as well as East German bands. The link will be in the show notes if I remember to put it in, or you should be able to find it by searching the name of our podcast in Spotify. So please stay with us on this journey, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks very much for listening.
Понимая ответственность задачи, я сделаю все, что в моих силах для выполнения заданий коммунистической партии и советского народа.